Welcome back, Trinidad and Tobago, where we continue our conversation. And just reminding you, we have two holidays coming up, Arrival Day and then Corpus Christi. You may be wondering, what is Corpus Christi? Is it just another holiday? What is the significance of this particular event? Well, none other than His Grace Jason Gordon, Archbishop of Port of Spain, is here to shed some light, and he's here also to talk to us a little bit about the recent developments regarding the young lady, Miss Naked, and the hijab and all that just basically blew up. So good morning and welcome.
Welcome. Thank you. Good to be here.
What are your thoughts on the recent developments regarding Miss Naked and her hijab?
You know, I don't think the issue is about Miss Naked and her hijab. I think we have a wider societal issue. We are a multi-religious, multi-ethnic, multi-everything society. We've been dealing with multi-dimensions for a very long time, but we've always dealt with it through the lens of one group for a very long time. So the British ran the country, so it was always within that framework. Now that we are our own nation, the past 50 years, I think we have to start to understand and develop a way of understanding how are we going to be a pluralistic society. And what I think is most important is that we develop some rules that work for everybody. So we can't have someone wanting to wear a hijab in their workspace, no matter where the workspace is, if someone else cannot wear a cross in their workspace, wherever the workspace is. And if someone else can't wear whatever the religious symbol that they're using in the workspace, wherever the workspace is. So we have to have a conversation about either it's for, what is good for one is good for all, or we have to say, well, not at all. And that discourse has to be a public discourse, and that could only be guided by the kind of society we want to become, and it could only be guided by how do we want to allow Trinidad and Tobago to evolve into the kind of society that we all will be proud of. And what does that really look like? So if a Catholic child went to a Muslim school and is wearing their cross outside, would that be allowed? Would it be tolerated? But why is that not seen as a right when this is seen as a right? So the question that we have to ask ourselves is what kind of society are we going to become? And are we going to have rules that are going to favor one group and not another group? We've done that before. That didn't work well. I think we have to really say, is either we're going to figure out how everyone does or how no one does. The other thing is, I mean, with the denominational schools. So I'm running schools for Catholics with a Catholic ethos, and want to establish a Catholic ethos. So another teacher who is of another faith comes to work in my school as an OJT and wants to promote their religion in my school. Does that make sense? These are the things that we have to have an understanding about. And we have to work through, and it's a tough one, but I think we better do it consciously and calmly when there's no problem, rather than doing it in the heat of law. And a legal solution is not always your best solution because it doesn't quite define the characteristics that define us as a nation. We are a wonderful nation, but we are an experiment in progress because we haven't come to nationhood and come to a settled place in terms of these challenges that we are facing, which is the circumstance of the history that has brought us all together in this wonderful space. And I think we have a lot to grow and a lot of discourse to happen to settle some norms that will guide the way our society will evolve.
Were you particularly surprised about that entire incident and how it unfolded?
No, we've had our own challenges with a child coming with a hijab into one of our schools as a student many years ago, and have had to wrestle through that. But that's why I'm saying, you know, how we settle it is so important, because I'm not sure. I've never tested it, but I'm not sure if a Catholic child going to or Christian child going to a Muslim school could wear a cross outside of his uniform or her uniform. I'm not sure that that can happen. And if one can happen, the other one should be able to happen. So that's what I think the discourse is about. I think we're missing the point by making it into this person.
Right.
And I think that's a total missing of the point. The point is the kind of society you want to evolve. Do we want that no matter where I am or what my employment is, I must be able to express my religious views and my religious sentiments and my religious paraphernalia regardless of my place of employment? If that's the kind of society we want, well, we'll have one kind of society. If we have another kind of society where I recognize that your space is your space, I wouldn't come here wearing a TV6 jersey and advertising another media house. Why wouldn't I do that? Why?
Point taken.
So it's a question of discourse, norms, and about the kind of society we want to be. We have to find that way and that space for it, and that has to be national.
Great. So let's switch gears a little bit, something on a lighter note. Corpus Christi.
That's not lighter, that's much more.
You think, okay, great. Well, let's tell us why. Why is it so, it's not lighter?
I'll start with a little bit of the history.
Sure.
You know, when the British took over Trinidad and Tobago back in 1803, the Corpus Christi celebration was happening with great pomp and ceremony. And the governor, who was a Spanish governor and a Catholic, would have received the 21-gun salute down in the Corpus Christi celebration at that time. In England at that time, Catholicism was under the ban. It was illegal to be Catholic in England. But yet, the British governor received the 21-gun salute for Corpus Christi in Trinidad and Tobago when England did not accept that Catholicism existed. Isn't Trinidad and Tobago a wonderful place? Isn't it just amazing? I just thought I'd start with that.
Interesting introduction.
It was part of the cedula of handing over Trinidad to England, and it was part of the Spanish requirement that Corpus Christi be a holiday, be revered, and that the 21-gun salute, regardless of who the governor is, take place. And the governor used to come down very happily and receive the 21-gun salute on Corpus Christi, who is a British governor with a Catholic peace. This is Trinidad and Tobago.
It sort of goes back to what we were just talking about. Yeah.
This is Trinidad and Tobago. We have something about us that is so unique in terms of our ability to work with stuff and move with stuff. Corpus Christi is one of the big celebrations for us. In the Gospel of John, chapter 6, Jesus devotes a whole chapter to the understanding of bread of life. And he pushes hard. He says, I'm the bread of life, and unless you eat of my body and drink of my blood, you cannot have life in me. And he pushes so hard that many of the disciples walk away from him. Because when he starts saying this twice, 3 times, and they start to get annoyed, he changes the verb of to eat to trogeo, which literally means unless you tear my flesh with your teeth, you cannot have life in me. And so this is not metaphorical. And Jesus didn't back down. He didn't say, well, you know, I was only talking metaphorically, you all don't understand, come on, come off of it. He stood his ground. And in fact, he went to Peter and he said, Peter, or to the apostles, are you going to leave too? And Peter says, Lord, where are we going to go? You have the message of eternal life. Peter didn't understand the teaching. He was as baffled as everyone who was leaving, but he understood Jesus, so he stayed with Jesus. The teaching on the Eucharist is a central teaching of the Christian tradition. It has always been a central teaching of the Christian tradition. Unfortunately, when we had the Protestant Reformation and we split out into many different groups, a lot of the Christian tradition lost the understanding and the teaching on Eucharist. Some have tried to recover it and made it into a metaphorical meal. That's not his teaching. This is the real presence of Jesus Christ. And in that sense, the Eucharist is at the very heart of our Christian tradition. We would say it's the source and summit of the whole of the Christian's life, because it's the source, it's where we draw from, it's the summit, is where we're going to. And in the teaching on the Eucharist, what we have is God making himself present to us as bread and as wine. Now, this requires great faith, as it did for the first apostles and disciples who wanted to leave because they couldn't understand. And today, many people want to leave because they can't understand also. So the Eucharist has always been a point of contention and a point of division within the community. But on the night before he died, Jesus took bread, said the blessing, broke the bread, gave it to his disciples and said, "Do this in memory of me." And so not only does he do it in John 6, but on the night before he dies, he hands this on to the apostles as a central teaching and commands them to do it in memory of him. And it is that in memory of him that makes the Eucharist, a command from Jesus. Paul, in speaking to the Corinthians, says, "I hand on to you what I myself have received," on the night before he died, and he gives a teaching. Corpus Christi is about the body and blood of Christ. That what we celebrate in the Eucharist is not just metaphorical or symbolic, it is him being present there. And if it is not, then the whole thing is not. And it is one of the touchstones of the whole of the Christian tradition.
Yes.
And so we hold this part of the Christian tradition as a custodian of this part of the truth, as we hold the whole of the Christian tradition. So the Feast of Corpus Christi is reminding us and reminding the whole Christian tradition that this teaching of Jesus is not something we can walk away from. It is not something we can get around, and is not something we can turn into metaphor. That it is a teaching that he has given that we all have to reckon and wrestle with. And that's why I think the holiday is a very powerful thing, because it's part of the Christian unity that we have to get to, where we really try to find ways to have the conversations about the different parts of our tradition as Christians that some of us may and some of us may not hold.
So what can we expect taking place at the church on Corpus Christi?
On Corpus Christi, we're going to be celebrating, starting in the grandstand. And from the grandstand, we're going to be walking, we're going to celebrate Mass, and then in the Mass, where the hosts and the wine are going to be consecrated, and then we're going to take the Eucharist and walk through the streets of Port of Spain and walk down to the cathedral through a route that will be set out. So it's going to be a wonderful, grand affair. We're going to have a lot of people coming out on the streets. It's usually a fairly big occasion. That's why we've moved it to the grandstand, where we have a bigger space for people to come. So it's going to be an amazing occasion. So I would ask all Catholics who are living in the Port of Spain area or anywhere else, come and join us. And the invitation is to everyone who would want to come and partake and be part of this wonderful celebration of Corpus Christi.
Wonderful. But can anyone have Holy Communion if you're not a Catholic?
So for us, communion is not a thing. It's a person. It's a person of Jesus Christ. And it also symbolizes that we are in communion with each other and in communion with our church. Okay. And so the reception of communion requires communion on all the levels.
Wonderful. Such a pleasure chatting with you. Very educational. I learned a lot. In 1803, what happened with history and all of that. Thank you so much. His Grace Jason Gordon, Archbishop of Port of Spain. Well, news is up next. Stay tuned.